Today on the agenda, we're actually going to do a review of a programming project that I saw someone else do, but I saw a whole bunch of errors in their code. And so I want to actually do a recreation of that project, but actually correct the problems that they made in their video or the mistakes that they made in their video. That being said, let's get started. Hey, my name is Kenny and I'm the owner of Robinson Handy and Technology Services. This video, I'm going to do a coding of a ATM console application. I've actually already had the application coded out because I've went through what he did in his video and then I built out the correct way of doing it. So I'm going to show you what he did and in comparison to what I have done, and hopefully you kind of get the gist of how that works. All right, so let's switch screens here. And so as you see, this is the video here, how to code an ATM console application in C#. This is a programming tutorial for beginners. However, the way and a number of other things that I see in here should not be done by a beginner. Just starting off with what's here. So if you see what's here, we have a public class. Now, mind you, this video was released on March 22nd, 2022. This is important because of the fact that C# .NET 6 was actually already released or functioning at that point. And so we're using a public class to represent an entity when in actuality, it probably should be a public record. I'll further add to this that the class name as well as the properties and what you will eventually see the methods all start with a lowercase letter, and that should not be the case when you're building a C# application. More than likely, the reason these three dots are here underneath the C in card holder, the P under pen, the B under balance, and probably in these others, as you will see later on, is because of the fact the IDE is trying to tell them, hey, your properties and class names should start with a capital C. C# uses what is known as Pascal case, and Pascal case meaning every word that is used in a variable, method, or class name, the first letter of that word is capitalized. Furthermore, so he is using the string class notated by a capital S instead of the type string with a lowercase s. And so that's why he has these green lines here in his IDE showing, hey, you probably want to pay attention and correct this, but he does not correct this. He continues on as if it is correct, and that is a problem. So I'm going to actually not play this video. I'm actually just going to skip around through various parts that I saw as he went through the code building this application out. Now continuing on, so as you see, the properties are already named there, and going a little bit further here. So he manually defines the getters and setters, and the problem with that is the getters and setters, as you see here, first name and last name, they don't have any additional functionality. For that reason, he should have used just the default get and set, because the get and set with each of the properties does exactly what he is doing here. Now, this is one of those scenarios where your code becomes poorly designed, and there's some other principles here that are that I'll cover later in the video as well. So as you see here, his setters are using the capital S string, which should not be the case, should be the lowercase s, and the method names are named incorrectly. As you see, we have again these three dots here because the IDE is trying to tell him this should be a capital S and not a lowercase s, but he ignores this and builds out this application as you see here. Also, the setters are not doing anything different other than setting the value here. So this code is actually additional code that does not need to be here. Just use the default get and set that comes with it instead of spelling them out and doing that here. Now, in some cases, you do need to spell out your getters and setters, but normally you only do that when there's additional functionality. There's no additional functionality here. So it is additional code that does not need to be here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit forward here. Another thing that I noticed, as you see here, he's defined a main, which in .NET 6, you don't have to define a main inside of your program.cs file. It's understood that anything in that program.cs file is main, and so they've excluded it. Now you can manually go in, and when you build your or create your project, you can pass the argument that allows you to, or that tells the .NET command line to add that main method in. Otherwise, the default action is to not to include the main, and that it is understood that the whole program.cs file is the main. One other thing I want to point out here, he has actually got methods inside of methods, and that should not be the case. Now I understand in some languages you can do that and get away with it, but in C#, that is not a normal practice, nor is it convention to do that. If you define a method, you define a method out in a class, but not inside of another method, and for that reason, this is invalid. In addition to, it's got a squiggly line there, which means the IDE is trying to tell them something. More than likely, it's trying to tell them, hey, you got a method was inside of a method. In addition, you have a method that starts with a lowercase letter, which I previously mentioned. And he goes to do this on with other methods as well, such as the deposit, withdrawal, and so forth. Now, the problem that I have with the deposit and the withdrawal methods are that he is mixing in business logic into the user interface. So with a console application, the user interface is the main method, because that's where you interact with everything in your main method, and it calls your console and so forth. So this is a violation of the separation of concerns concept or principle, because of the fact you're doing business logic in your user interface. Your class should really only be doing one thing. In the code that I'm going to show you of me refactoring this application, what I did was I actually moved this business logic to the model or entity, so that all of that business logic is encapsulated there. So we don't have an anemic domain model or an anemic domain entity, depending on how you say it. Everything as far as it relates to that entity is in that entity's class. Now we're jumping ahead here, and as you see, this is the withdrawal business logic. So he does get the balance and check the balance if it's there. If the balance is greater than the withdrawal amount, write to the console that you have an insufficient balance. Now, he does later point out that this arrow is actually facing the wrong direction, which is correct. But again, you're having business logic into your user interface, which should never be the case. All right, the next thing he does is he adds the list of card holders to the main method, which is fine because his application does not have a database associated with it. One thing that stuck out to me though is, for instance, so this debit card num, which in my opinion should be spelled out, is only used within this while loop. That being said, it should be declared only inside of that while loop instead of outside of that while loop, because now at this point any other functionality within this method has access to this variable, which they should not. They should only have access to the property associated with that card holder, which is available via the current user variable. So this, in my opinion, is a problem. This declaration of which should be lowercase string instead of uppercase should be all inside of this try block. All right, another thing I want to point out on this is he is using first or default. Now, if you think about it, and if you're not aware, this will be a teaching moment. First or default will go and check a list, and it will give you the first match out of that list. Now, if this is a bank account, and you have multiple bank accounts with the same bank account number, that is a problem, right? Because if that multiple bank accounts are not owned, if those same bank accounts with the same account number are not owned by the same person, that means I can go make a deposit into somebody else's account and they can go withdraw out of my account if we both have the same account ID numbers. That being said, this right here is a defect or a bug because this should be single or default. You should not have multiple account numbers or multiple accounts with the same account number. And if you do, you should throw an exception and not allow anything to happen to those accounts until that issue is corrected. So this is another problem here, the first or default. All right, so we have the try catch here, and in my honest opinion, when you're using strings that are when you're using a string multiple times in your application, that string should be entered into a variable, and then that variable is called instead of having the same string multiple times. The reason being, you could type this one correctly and then you could misspell the second one, and now you got the same string that's misspelled in the second one, but it's not misspelled in the first one. And so by having a string or a variable defined with the string and then just printing that string out will help eliminate the issue of where that misspelling is. All right, so as we jump forward, all right, so here he's doing a do while loop, which I don't have a problem with. In the application that I built, though, I did not use a do while loop. I did it a little bit differently because of the fact you really don't need a do while loop. You could just while true, and then at the end of the application, then you exit out. All right, and he has all of those there, and he goes through the rest of this where he actually tests out and utilizes the application. All right, so that's the gist of that application. Now I'm going to show you what I built based off of what he did and the issues that I corrected that he did not, or the issues that he had that I corrected in my version. I've also added some other enhancements in here, so I'll cover those briefly. And if you want a copy of this source code, you can go to the website rstservices.net and download it from there. A link will be down in the description. All right, coming to the cardholder class. So we're going to start here. We're declaring this as a public record. We're not using a class for this because it is an entity, and as such, it should be declared as a record to reflect that. The default constructor. One thing that he did have in his was that he declared pin as an integer, but as I went through the comments of the people in that video, somebody said, hey, I have a pin number that is 0000, and it is passing when it should not, or excuse me, it's not passing when it should. And the reason being is because he declared it as an integer. 4 zeros is the same thing as 1 0 when you change it to an integer. And so that's why it was doing what it was doing. And thus the suggestion to fix that was to change that integer to a string. Even though it is a pin number, it should be a string to make sure that it is 4 digits. Next thing I did, I obviously declared my properties on this class with the proper naming convention, which is Pascal case, as I previously mentioned. I also set the properties to be have private setters, and I'll show you why. So I've added in the invalid pin number, which is a method I created that he did not do. He actually put this logic into the main method, which I honestly believe should be in the domain model because it is a business rule and not a user interface functionality. Change pin number was something I added, so I'm not going to cover that as much. Same thing for new debit card, a functionality that I added. All right, so deposit amount. As you see here, this is a rule that he has in his application to actually check this condition to make sure that the deposit amount is a valid amount. I actually moved that to the cardholder class because of the fact that is a business rule and should be in the domain instead of in the user interface. Likewise, for the withdrawal amount, I actually have that amount less than 0, so you can't withdraw a negative amount from the bank. You actually have to give them a positive amount, and then you do this calculation here to subtract that amount from the balance. Now, if you put that amount as a negative amount in here, that negative and you may or may not remember from math class, but a negative minus a negative is a positive, so that you would actually withdraw and add to the account, and that's a problem. So we have this rule here to make sure that the account amount is not negative. Also, you can't withdraw more than you have in your balance, so we have a rule here to check to make sure that the amount that you entered is less than the balance, and if it is greater than the balance, then you throw the insufficient balance message back on the console. And those are all of the business rules. All right, so now we will come to the program.ces, which the entire file is a main. All right, so we have a declaration for the cardholder. So this is essentially the database, if you will, for the accounts and so forth. And I only have 5 in here, so enough just to prove that this actually does work. And we have a console line printing the name of our financial institution. Because this is the RHT Services channel, we have the RHT Services Credit Union. Go figure. And then we declare a null cardholder value, or excuse me, a null cardholder variable. Now, ideally, this would all be within a loop, and the ATM would never shut down until you forced it to shut down. But the way he built the application, you go, you check your account, and then you exit out. So I built it in a similar manner. All right, first, you insert your debit card. So basically, you enter the card number, and I corrected that issue with the first or default to single or default to make sure that we are only getting one card number that is valid up here. If the cardholder number is null, then we exit out of the application because, we exit out of the loop because, if the cardholder is not null, meaning we actually did find a cardholder, then we exit out of this loop and come down to the PIN number prompt. Now, if the cardholder is still null, meaning we did not find a card number that matches what we've entered, then we come down here and say card not recognized, please try again. And this continues. Now, this invalid operation exception can be thrown from the, I believe, read line. It can be thrown from the single or default. The reason being is if you have multiple rows that match, then that is an invalid operation exception. Whereas if you do first or default, it won't throw that exception. It will just give you the first one out of the list. So if there's multiple matches for that card number, we want to throw the exception and print that back out to the console, to which they will have the opportunity to reinsert their debit card. All right, so once they enter a valid debit card, then we come down to this next block of code, which is to enter your PIN number. We're using that method on the model or entity to validate that the number entered is a valid PIN number that matches the previously entered card number. And if it is, it will break out of this loop. If it is not, it will throw an exception, and to which it will say to print, print invalid PIN number. And probably should say, please try again after that. All right, so once you enter the valid card number and a valid PIN number, you then are greeted by welcome and the first name of the account holder, and then you get this menu. Now, items 4 and 5 are not included in the application that was built in that video. Only 1, 2, 3, and 6 are there. His 6 is actually number 4, but for the sake of the additional features that I added, it's got renamed to 6. All right, so the make deposit method, and I'm gonna just go through these one by one. So if you enter 1, you come down here to the first case. And one thing that I noticed is that he had the option selection moved outside of the loop. So he had the option selection up here, which it does not need to be because this variable is only used inside of this while loop. So put the declaration of the variable inside where it's actually being used. All right, so we do a switch. And so if the case is 1, which means we want to make a deposit, you prompt them how much money are they entering, and then you take their input and you convert it to a double value. It probably should be a float, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to do a double. And then you use the method on the entity to deposit that amount. This will run against those business rules that are defined there, and then you get the property to the balance property back from the class and let them know them being the user know what their balance is. There's a similar method for withdrawing. So if you enter in a 2 at the main menu, you will get to withdraw the amount of your choosing, long as that amount is less than the balance that you have in your account. Case number 3 is just to print out the balance. So check balance, and that is straightforward. You just do cardholder.balance and you end up accessing the getter for that particular property. Simple and straightforward. And if you enter in 6 or 4 in his application, you exit out of the application. Now what he did was a little bit different. He did a do while loop, and that while would continue unless the option selected was 4. What I chose to do was to continue, and if you get to this point, you're going to return and basically exit out of the application at this point. The reason I did this is because this is a switch statement instead of a if condition. So you would have to break out of the switch statement, and then you would have to break again out of the while loop to exit the application, and I didn't want to have to do that. So it was easier just to return nothing to get out of the application. Now, if at any point you break one of these business rules, such as withdrawing amount greater than what you have in your account, it will throw an exception from this method, to which then that will be elevated up to this catch, and then that message will be printed out here in the console. That being said, now that the code has been, or I've shown you the code, we can actually go ahead and do a demo. So we'll do .NET run, and I'm gonna do it from the integrated terminal. And this may have to compile again, so bear with me. And there are some warnings, and most of these warnings are because of the fact of the no reference. Those can be turned off in the csproj file. All right, so insert your debit card. So what I'm going to do is actually copy and paste one of the numbers from up here. So we'll do copy and paste, enter, and enter your PIN number. So 9686, enter. All right, so welcome Hannibal. So as you see, we have that card number with that PIN number, and Hannibal, last name Smith, and he has $2. Now, one thing I did not correct in here, and I will go correct at a later point, is the printing out or the formatting of the number. You'll see that here shortly. All right, so if we check the balance of this account, as you see, the default amount that it starts with is $2. So if I enter in 3 here at the prompt, I get your balance is 2, and whoops. And this is the formatting thing that I was talking about, where it actually should be 2.00. There's a currency formatting that you have to do with a console.writeline that I did not do in this, but we'll go add at some point. All right, so let's say we want to withdraw money. So we'll put in a 2. How much would you like to draw? I would like to draw $5. So I'm gonna put 5 down there, and there you go. Get your insufficient balance message. So if I go and do withdraw money again, so we'll do 2, and how much would you like to withdraw? I'm gonna say $1.50. All right, so your new balance is 0.5, which basically is 50 cents. And if I want to deposit money, I will enter in 1, and let's say I got paid today, and I made $100.25. All right, so your new balance is 175 cents. And that's basically the 50 cents plus the 125. The debit card and credit, the new change debit card pin and request new debit card functionality. I'll go ahead and show you this, but just note this is not in the original video that I'm actually reviewing. So if you do a change debit card pin, you press in 4, it will ask you to enter in a new 4-digit pin number. So we're going to do 9876. All right, and it says your PIN number has been changed. Now, if we were to actually be saving this to a database, you could then log out and then log back in, and that new PIN would be used to log in. Likewise, when you request a new debit card number, so it gives you here your new debit card number, and this is a 16-digit number. And of course, keep your cards in the safe place. And last but not least, we will test out the quick. So we press number 6, and you get the thank you, have a nice day message, which is down here at the very end right there. And then we return, which means to close out the application. All right, that being said, that wraps this video up. As I previously mentioned, if you want a copy of the source code, the link of it will be down in the description below. The link to the original video will also be down in the description below, so you can go watch that and you can compare what he did to what I did. I'm gonna be honest with you, while my code may not be perfect, it is more in line with what is done or what are the coding conventions or coding standards for C#. in comparison to what he did, in my opinion. If you disagree with that opinion, by all means, drop a comment down below. I'll be glad to have any discussions and clarifications of anything that was discussed here and also in that particular video. Comments or questions, leave them down below. Please be sure to subscribe, clicking the subscribe button down below somewhere. And also, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know you're interested in this content, so I am more inclined to create more content like this. Thank you for watching. Have a good day, and see you on the next project.